we're now going to move on to our next module entitled The Digital Student Data Ecosystem. Now, in this phase, we're going to look at issues ranging from data mining to paperless systems to digital badges, new systems for credentials, and other things we may not already have thought of when the word digitalisation crops up. We'll also be bringing an international dimension to today's proceedings with our panellists, Dr. Victoriano Geralt of the University of Málaga, Dr. James Keevy, an international education expert from South Africa, and also on our panel is Lee O'Farrell of the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. At the end of their presentations, as we did in our previous module, we'll hear a reaction to them from Dr. Bryan Maguire, Director of Quality Assurance at Quality and Qualifications Ireland, again, our hosts today. So our first speaker today is from South Africa. Dr. James Keevy was due to join us here today. Unfortunately, there's been a difficulty with that, but he is joining us on Skype. So he is a policy researcher in the education and training sector, particularly in relation to regional, national and international qualifications frameworks in Africa and further afield. He's published research into qualifications, the recognition of learning, as well as the professionalisation and migration of teachers. He's Chief Executive Officer at JET Education Services, which is an independent public benefit organisation in Johannesburg, and in that capacity he works with the government, the private sector, international development agencies and educational institutions. His address today is entitled Recognition in a Digitised World. He's going to examine the use of digital technologies in skills development globally, including how digital learners' records and open data sources are complementing traditional qualifications repositories. He'll also look at key issues including the trustworthiness of data and the interoperability of systems. Now, he's going to join us now, if I can call in Dr. James Keevy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think just to start out with, it's going to be important that you just check the sound and that I'm going okay, that I don't go on for too long without anybody hearing me. But thank you so much for the opportunity. I want to invite you, as I start, that you see the QR code that's on the screen. And if you have an app on your phone, if you could just scan it and open the link. If you don't have a QR code scanner, you can just type in the link that's below the QR code into your browser. It's bit.ly/, and it's QQI 2017. Just make sure the QQI is in caps. I'd like to get back to this at the end of my presentation, if you don't mind. So thank you again so much, Ingrid, and to John in particular for inviting me, and Padraig, who I haven't seen for a while. I'm sure there's a couple of familiar people in the audience. Anna Murphy, I hope you're there, and Shauna Riley. I'm so sorry I couldn't make it with you. I got a bit stuck with the UK Home Office on Sunday evening, but that's another story that I can tell you about in another time. So my first slide is really about giving you a bit of a kind of taste in terms of where we are as a world and really as a qualifications community, in terms of what we understand in terms of skills and recognition. So I've got a short video clip. Let's see how it goes. I'd like to play the video clip to you. I'm getting a sense of...
time, business as usual was offered up. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science. Right? Cars or computers that can learn and think. The work will never be the same. The skills need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it? Disruption has become the new normal. With change, it's always gradually, then suddenly, well, things really have stopped happening gradually. This change is exponential. Everything that used to be dumb and disconnected is now wired and intelligent. Cars, cities, ports, farms, even our bodies will be wired with sensors and will talk to each other. These game changers are also combinatorial. They amplify each other, creating a perfect storm of change. Quantum computing fuels big data. The Internet of Things fuels artificial intelligence and deep learning, which fuels robotics. However, anything that cannot be digitized or automated will become extremely valuable. Human-only traits such as creativity, imagination, intuition, emotion, and ethics will be even more important in the future, because machines are very good at simulating, but not at being. Yes, robots and software will do some of our work, but this will allow us to focus on things that cannot be automated. To imagine change squared, you've got to start engaging more with what might be, not just with what is. Immerse yourself into the immediate future, 5 to 7 years out from today. We need to go beyond technology and data to reach human insights and wisdom. Technology represents the how of change, but humans represent the why. The future is about holistic business models. The opportunity is to be liquid, to learn just in time, not just in case, not single improvements, but complete transformations, not individual systems, but new ecosystems. Humanity is where true and lasting value is created. We will engage, relate, and buy things because of the experiences they provide, because of their transformative power. The future doesn't just happen, the future gets happened. The new way to work is to embrace technology, but not to become it. The future is in technology, yet the bigger future lies in transcending it. Let's live and lead from here.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was clear in terms of the sound. The video really represents something to me in terms of the work that I'm doing at the moment. I've been working in qualifications frameworks and qualification systems for many years. And it's as if the technology is catching up with us so quickly. And I'm not quite convinced that organizations that are working in this area are staying abreast with the latest developments, particularly in the credential space. When it comes to robotics and artificial intelligence, there's huge developments at the moment. Those of you that might be familiar with some of these would be familiar with Sophia and the robotics, the kind of things that you can very easily Google. If you've got a bit of time, you can just Google Hanson Robotics. It's a company in Hong Kong, and what they're doing amazing things with robotics. Our challenge in the credential world is that AI and machine learning and the new technology, we haven't quite caught up with it, and we're not using it for the right purposes. People like Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking and many others are warning us against the use of AI. The point I'd like to make today is I think we need to embrace this, but in a way that we recognize human-only traits and that we actually give a benefit to those things that humans can do that machines can't do. So you'd all be familiar with the 4 industrial revolutions. I've got a slide here that I can just briefly show you and take you through. I mean, the first one was really about craft. The second one was about liberalism and consciousness of equal rights. The third one brought us about emphasis on computers and automation, but it's really the new one, the 4th industrial revolution, that's interest to me. And I think of interest to qualification bodies like the QQI and many others. And the point really is about those human-only traits that machines cannot simulate. Let me show you this slide quickly. You'd all be familiar with Facebook often maps out its users, different Facebook users across the world. What's interesting is there's a very direct causality between a Facebook user and actually internet coverage and internet access. So it's a very good proxy to look at internet coverage. This is the Facebook users in 2010. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you is the Facebook users exactly 7 years later in 2017. Can you see the increase in the pace and the coverage just in the last 7 years? And I'm going to go back again so you can see this is where we were 7 years ago, and this is where we are now. So in a very short space of time, connectivity is increasingly exponentially. And this has an impact on the way we recognize credentials, on skills, and etc. So the main point I'd like to leave with you today, doing this via Skype, is if technology is changing, so must our understanding and our forms of credentialing. We can't stay with the normal ways that we've been doing credentialing up to now. One of the new things, which I'm sure you spoke about today, is open badges and digital badges. There are many examples of digital badges, and increasingly this is providing an avenue for employers, but also for learners to recognize their skills, different combinations in different ways. This is gradually getting closer and closer to the kind of formal quality assurance world that we operate in. The New Zealand Qualification Authority, for example, at the moment is trialing some quality assurance mechanisms with digital badges, and so others are following, and I'll share one or two of those with you now. This is a picture I often stand still at. Just take a bit of time and have a look at it. I think for so long, our emphasis has been on formal qualifications, but yet an individual has so much more that they bring to the table. Typically, I mean, when you apply for a job, of course, you provide your CV, not only your qualifications. So the challenge to us in this world today, with the technology we have, is how to represent more than your formal learning through something that can be transported, can be migrated, can be recognized across countries. So the CV is maybe the old way of looking at it. The new term that we're using now, based on work by Mike Coles and Jens Boyenholt, is called representation. Representation is an ability to pull together all these things that we would normally put on a CV, but also make them recognizable and portable and also verifiable across different countries and different regions. So digital credentials, let's have a look at digital credentials then. We can have open badges, we can look at human skills and the importance of human skills, but increasingly organizations across the world are now looking at the digital credentials and actually mainstreaming them. This is a very short video clip from City and Guilds. And make no mistake, I'm not from City and Guilds, I'm not advocating what they're doing, but I think this is a really nice little video clip that'll give you a sense of what they're doing at the moment, and many other companies are following.
Digital credentials will play a huge role in employers getting closer to defining their skills they need for employment.
I think digital credentials offer our customers the opportunity to really promote themselves. It gives them the opportunity to provide a real framework for the learners, and it gives them a chance to reward those learners for every bit of learning they do, not just things that perhaps should be sat within a qualification or a programme of study.
At ILM, we see opportunity to add more value to learners and add more meaning, and primarily by rewarding and recognising learning in bite-sized chunks throughout the course of a programme to encourage engagement and completion, then also enabling learners to showcase and communicate their achievements in a way that employers will really understand.
And digital credentials provide you with a great way of forming a picture of the skills base across the whole organisation in a really streamlined way, which you can then use to help them manage talent, do succession planning, and identifying gaps in your organisation.
City and Guilds customers get a lot of benefits from digital credentials, but primarily it's the visibility of their employee workforce, skills that they can use as a business.
I think that's a really nice example of what can be done with digital credentials. I hope everybody's still with me. The Skype thing makes it a bit difficult to see body language and how you react to me, but I'm going to keep going. So if the chairperson can just interrupt me if there's anything that she needs to say. Ingrid, is that okay?
Watching, listening, and enjoying your presentation. If there is a breakdown for any particular period of time, I will come to the podium and I will intervene with you and let you know that.
All right, great. Thanks, Ingrid. So we can't digital credentials without talking blockchain. I'm sure you've spoken about it this morning. Blockchain, a technology that has really started in the financial sector, is now allowing us to verify records in a very open and very transparent and a very democratic way. There's a small article there that I took from a news article, 22 September, quite recently. where Malta is actually looking at exploring blockchain for education certificates. Now, of course, Malta is not the only country that's doing it, and Victoriano will talk to you just now about, from the Groningen perspective, what's happening there. But I think we now have the technology to be able to use the digital credentials in a meaningful way. Because the criticism is always, how do you check, how do you verify the quality of training and learning that happens in such a multiple, diverse way? And I think blockchain is the way to help us to do that. It's not the only technology that's going to help us, but it's a really important one. Let me go to the next slide. So here's just a visual representation. This is just actually from the finance sector, how the blockchain works. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but essentially what you can see is the critical thing about blockchain probably lies in number 3, where different parties actually have access to this transaction that happened, whether it's a financial transaction or an educational transaction, it doesn't matter. They all verify the transaction. That then gets recorded in a way that is non-refutable, that cannot be taken away, and then the transaction is processed. Now, as much as this can happen for finances, it can also happen for an educational transaction. Think of a learner that has a record at a university. A learner can now actually authorize access to that particular record by using blockchain and giving different organizations. One of them could be a university. One of them could be a qualifications agency, and whoever the other one could be. And so in this way, the learner now has control over the verification, although the bodies that award the credential are still very much involved. So this offers a real opportunity for us, I think, internationally going forward. The next slide is just, I'm not going to spend time on it, it's just to kind of give you a sense internationally. It's quite dated already. How many countries across the world are using blockchain for different interventions? You can see most of them are financial related. I think if we update this picture now, you will see so many more in diverse markets, diverse industries, including education. I'm not an advocate for blockchain, but I do think blockchain offers us a really important tool when we talk about digital credentialing. Let me stop here for a second. I think this is the core of my presentation, and then I have 2 or 3 slides to follow. Working in the qualification space with people like John O'Connor and many others, we've come to a point, I think, as a community, where we understand that when we look at a digital kind of credential system, we have to look at it as an ecosystem. There are so many parts to this digital system, and I can quickly run through it, and it's not rocket science. There's provisioning that happens. There are universities, both public, private providers that offer qualifications and credentials. They're increasingly part of this ecosystem. There's the awarding bodies that play a role in some countries, particularly in the UK and some others. Then there's the quality assurance. Now, the biggest challenge for me, at least, has been that our quality assurance community has been a bit slow in uptake around the new technology, although the provisioning has been quite quick. Then there's the evaluation. So you would know, I mean, as people move across the world, increasingly they need to have their qualifications verified. The kind of NARIC function that you have in the UK and other parts of the world fulfills this function. They are now increasingly becoming part of this community. Then we need to verify. I use blockchain as a technology that helps us to verify, but there are others. Increasingly, we're seeing private sector organizations springing up that are doing the verification of qualifications. The US is a case in point. Then the analysis of the data. I mean, that's, again, it's quite straightforward. If we have all this data in an ecosystem, it's so much easier to analyze it using new technology and AI, etc. The last part of the ecosystem is the convening part. This is where organizations like the Groningen Declaration Network play a really important role, but there are many others. UNESCO is playing a role here, and other world organizations. For the first time, as a world community that works on credentials, we are starting to talk to each other, both across the formal and the non-formal divide, and looking at these new ways of embracing the technology to help us to understand the ecosystem much better. I think we're at an exciting point as a community, but we're also at a point that if we don't move quickly, these things are going to overtake us, and we're going to sit with outdated systems that are not sufficient for employers nor for the learners that we serve. So I'm not going to talk about the Groningen Declaration. Victoriano will talk to this. I just want to emphasize that I think they're really filling an important niche at the moment in terms of this digital ecosystem. Another organization that's playing an important role at the moment is the Lumina Foundation. If you've got a few minutes, just Google Lumina Foundation and look at the work they're doing in the United States. The United States is one of the countries that has not developed a qualifications framework. There are over 140 countries that have NQFs, but the US has never done it. What the Lumina Foundation is driving at the moment is they're calling it a credentials framework. So it's a really interesting take on what we've been doing for the last 20 or 30 years, but it's taking the digital technologies and the new learnings into the qualifications framework world. So have a look at this. If you're more interested, I can also share some more information about this when there's time. Another really important point that I need to leave with you is the idea of interoperability. Within this digital ecosystem are different parts, whether it be provisioning or quality assurance, or verification, or validation, or even the data mining. We need to have open systems that talk to each other. And here again, the challenge to the traditional quality assurance bodies like the QQI and others is to stay abreast of what's happening and actually to take the lead. And there's some examples like Malta and like New Zealand that are actually showing us that even a traditional qualification authority or qualification agency can take this technology forward and actually start piloting some of this in a very innovative way. XAPIs, if you haven't heard about XAPIs, it's an interesting technological solution. For those of us that have worked with qualifications, we would be talking about learning outcomes for many years. XAPI is the digital equivalent of a learning outcome. It's a way to describe learning in a way that it articulates with a learning management system and increasingly then in the digital badges and also with a digital ecosystem. It's not really anything new in that sense, but it gives us the digital equivalent of what we've been using as learning outcomes. And I think it's worth our while to interrogate this and understand it much better. So let me summarize. Where are we at the moment on current approaches? We emphasize the divide between the formal, the non-formal, and the informal. This has been part of what we've been talking about for many years. And it also makes our life very complicated. Where we're heading, this divide is becoming much more blurred. But it becomes so blurred that I think many of us get quite nervous because we struggle then with how do we actually verify and quality assure the non-formal and the informal. The central role of national qualification frameworks is with us at the moment and has been with us for the last at least 25 years. We see regional qualification frameworks developing all over the world. So the question we need to ask ourselves, are these frameworks going to stay with us or are they going to change? A couple of points in that. I think these frameworks need to focus more on interoperability. We see the regional frameworks developing more and more, and we also see this idea of world reference levels. World reference levels is an idea of a kind of meta, you can call it maybe a kind of set of meta descriptors, not necessarily a meta framework, but a set of meta descriptors where as an international community we agree on different levels of learning and different types of learning. So some people might argue it's kind of meta qualifications framework, but the idea is not to develop it as a full framework, but rather as a set of descriptors. The world reference levels have been under development for the last 5 years. People in your local community, like John, is somebody you can talk to that's been very involved in the process. It's not science fiction, it's actually something that's happening at the moment. Third bullet on the left, around the current approaches, recognition of prior learning works, but it's costly and it's slow. I've been involved in a couple of international initiatives, and we often see with RPL, we have islands of good practice, but we're struggling to take it to scale. So in the digital world, people are talking about stacking and not about RPL. It's the same principle, but stacking allows us in a much more interactive, and I would argue also a much more cost-effective way to group different competencies and different credits and different skills together in a way that is much more mainstream. Where are we now? A strong role of the national competent recognition authorities, like the QQI, like the NARICs of this world. But clearly, as we move ahead, we're giving control back to the learner. And that's where blockchain comes in. We now allow the learner to manage the credentials that they have. It's actually given back to them to manage in a very significant way. It's not taken away from the competent recognition authorities, but the power or the management actually goes back to the learner. And I think that's actually where we all wanted to go at some point. My last point, we've been using learning outcomes, and clearly we're seeing technology now in some sense copying what we've been doing in the kind of learning, training and learning world, and they use XAPIs. What's amazing about this is it allows us to actually talk to each other. So we have a very interdisciplinary approach where we're not getting stuck in a conventional way of doing things, but technology is allowing us to do things in a more innovative way. So in summary then, if you have a look at the picture I have here, I just want to compare these two things for you. So on the right-hand side, we have the rise of AI and machine learning and all these kind of things, which I'm sure you spoke about today. We have robots replacing menial tasks. And you'll be amazed how many robots are out there at the moment. And as I said, Google human-like robots, and you'll see a couple of examples, robots that are being sold right now. Now, I'm not talking doom and gloom here. I'm not saying robotics are bad. But what I am saying on the left-hand side, I think it's time that we catch up in terms of our understanding of learning and our recognition of learning. So our traditional qualifications, some people also call macro credentials, and NQFs and regional qualification frameworks and credits and learning outcomes should now gradually grow into something that is more, that maybe we speak more about as XAPIs, and we use blockchain. We speak about micro credentials. And what I want to argue for is that we speak more and more about representation. Representation is actually, and it was the idea of the CV that I showed you a few minutes ago, that anything that cannot be digitized is actually the real value we're going to have in the future. Not so much those things that are easily and formally recognized, but those things that we cannot digitize. So what I want you to do, if you've had an opportunity to do, to get to it, the quick survey that I sent to you, I don't know how many of you had a chance to have a look at it. I just want to have a quick look if anybody's accessed it. Okay, we got 44 responses. That's great. So if you allow me, Ingrid, I'm just quickly going to swap to that to the responses, and we just see how people responded. If that's okay with you?
No problem at all.
Okay. Okay, so we had 44 responses. I just want to have a quick look at it and share it with you. Can you see it on the screen, Ingrid?
We can see it, yes. Thank you very much.
All right, so you can quickly just see there anything that cannot be digitized or automated. Most people, I think a good spread there, most people had a strong agreement or at least agreed. The second one was about human-like robots being a reality. I think we agree on that. Does credentials change? I think we agree on that. And then maybe the last point there, are we ready as a global community really to implement digital credentials? And you can see the shift there, and I agree with this response. I think our challenge as a global qualifications community is we're playing a bit of catch-up. And I think it's time we get ahead of the curve, that we really look at examples like New Zealand and like Malta. Let's not compromise our quality processes, but let's get ahead. Let's look at the digital ecosystem, and let's bring these digital players together in a way that actually allows us to recognize skills in a very innovative way. The technology is available. We have everything at our fingertips at the moment. Let's not be slow in this process. Let's actually set the trend in terms of the international community. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm sorry I had to do this via Skype. I hope it was okay for you and you could engage with me. I look forward to hearing the other presenters and also responding to some of the questions. So, thanks so much, Ingrid.
Thank you very much. If I may, James, just in case the connection goes down before we come to our group discussion, I would just like to ask you one question. One of the things that has come across very much in the presentations this morning is the pace of change, that everything is accelerating, that it is a really rapid development sphere. And yet, you know, there's a concern about, for example, the privacy issues around qualifications, the data management, all of that. As somebody working in this field, as a policy issue, what would be the priority to accommodate the need for rapid change while safeguarding the reservations people have about whether the technology is ready to safeguard, you know, privacy issues, data issues, and all of that?
Quick response, Ingrid. I don't think we have a choice. I think if we're going to be too slow in embracing the new technology, we're going to lose as a kind of qualification credential community, and the privatization and many of the things that are happening are going to overtake us. That's not to say privatization is bad, but I do think as a community that is serious about quality and about the verification of these credentials, we've got to stay ahead of the game. So how do we engage in a policy environment with this kind of thing? I think it's a real challenge. I think for some countries, and I've used Malta and New Zealand as two examples a couple of times now, I think we should look at what they're doing. They're able to actually embrace this in the policy environment by piloting it and by testing it within the more formal environment. So I don't think we've got a choice. I think we've got to embrace this and work with it. And I think the technology, as I explained to now, is there as well to verify and to make sure the privacy is there. So I don't think we should be scared of this. We should embrace it and move ahead. But that's an easy thing to answer for somebody who's not the CEO of the QQI. I do understand when you look at that environment, I mean, it's a different, the odds are different and the risk is different. But I think there are good examples of where this is being tested even in a formal environment. And let's look at those examples and let's look at what they're doing.
Well, I hope you'll be able to stay with us for the discussion when we pick up questions later. But just in case we do lose you, I'd like to thank you very, very much. And I'd ask the audience to show their appreciation of your contribution. Now, I'm going to call up our next speaker, Dr. Victoriano Geralt of the University of Málaga. He's currently the president of the board of the Stichting Groningen Declaration Network. His professional background for the last 30 years has been in the technical domain, focused on systems administration and internet technologies, and that included setting up the first Spanish websites. He has specialized in digital identity and privacy, which are, as we all know, are key issues in digitalisation. When we asked him for an abstract of his presentation, he suggested he would present the human species as a nomadic one that is forced to carry their academic achievements as a heavy load of paper, thus hampering the flow of talent around the world. So we're intrigued to hear what you have to say. Please take the podium.
I think I'm trying to use the clicker.
Yeah, and here we go.
Here it comes, yeah. Make it big. View. Full screen. Okay. Okay, so thanks for having me here. John, Beata, you've been working a lot to bring me here because of my crazy agenda. So when I was thinking about giving this presentation to you, I was thinking, well, how do we do this? And actually this morning, fortunately, the presentation was uploaded here because I've thought of many ways to change it while listening to previous people. So it's been a blessing that I couldn't touch it. So user-centric future, I think it's coming. We will come to that at the end. So yeah, humans are nomadic. We like moving around. Well, it's clear we are here, right? Some of us have come from 3 hours flight, not too much. But, well, I've come from afar, and I'm here talking to you. We like to move around. And James was over Skype, but probably he would have liked better to come here and network with us, because that cannot be substituted by technology, networking. I've been doing video conferencing since the 80s, and there's no way that you can substitute human interaction. So we are nomadic, and we like it. And nomads usually travel with their belongings with them. In a way, well, you see these people around the Tibet. And some of us in the room may still remember these nice thingies that were red and, you know, it was a mess to have in your pocket. Probably some of us are laughing. But nowadays we do it like that, right? We scan QR codes and we do it quick and we do it electronically. So how do you like flying without papers? It's pretty comfortable, right? Just in your pocket, you get in, immediately board the plane. That's great, right? And nowadays, well, we do formal academia, we study, we do in-job training, we work, we self-train, we live, we live train, we play, right? Everything is helping us get something new into our heads. Even coming here, I've got some things to think about. And my good friend Tom Black, then at Stanford, now moved to Johns Hopkins, said one day to me, all your documents are born digital. And that's absolutely true. We have a lot of paper in our bags, and they were born like PDFs, or even before that, some document processing tool. So all our documents are born digital. But academic migrants are forced to bring their academic credentials like that. When you move a university from one university to the other, they say, oh, do you have this form, this paper, this whatever? Have you sent this paper to the credential evaluator? Has the credential evaluator stamped? And then comes the apostille, a piece of paper that said that the piece of paper in front of you is a piece of paper saying what it said on that. Oh, great, absolutely wonderful, yeah? Wonderful pieces of paper that we carry around. That's crazy, right? We are in the 21st century. We're talking blockchain, we're talking banking data, we're talking, and we are still carrying paper for education. That's crazy. So it's clear that the digitalization is a must, but digital change is a culture change. and we've been talking here this morning, that, well, changing a culture takes some time. As much as we do like to do things fast. The previous part of this morning was about how we're going to change education into a more digital way to do things and how to bring digital skills into education. But that should spill into the culture. I've been shouting to the Commission for some years now that they should go digital in their processes. We're sort of succeeding. So, in April 2012, the Groningen Declaration was presented to the world. We decided that we should fix this in a global way. It's not only in Europe. So it was a declaration of intent. It's nothing more than saying that citizens worldwide should be able to consult and share their authentic educational data with whomever they want, whenever they want, wherever they are. That's the important thing. If I want to show you something about me, I can just pop up my phone and show you on the internet. So that should be also be available for our academic data. I can even show you my bank information if I decide to. So why not with my academic data? And allow me to show this small commercial. It's a couple of minutes, but we like it. So open, of course, open. And do it full screen. Oops. 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 Wait a minute. It has escaped. You have control of the thing. The most, you know, CIO, and I lost the video. Great. Should be somewhere here. Yeah, that's it. Go back to the start. Come on, stop. Go back. Do it right, you idiot. Now.
We book our plane tickets online, we do our banking online, and we keep our important information in the cloud, so it's always there when we need it. But we don't do that with some of the most important documents in our lives. Our diplomas. We're still dealing with them the way we have for decades, even centuries, on paper. Paper is nice and tangible, but not really practical. You can lose it, misplace it, or have it stolen. It can be torn, burnt, or eaten by your dog. And even if it doesn't, there's another problem. It could be fake. Documents can be quite elaborate to prevent forgeries, but it's not easy to establish whether you're dealing with a valid document or a piece of paper with nicely printed decorations, an impressive seal, and pretty handwriting.
No,
and even if it is the real thing, the person presenting it might be using a document that doesn't belong to them to try and pass off someone else's credentials as their own. So paper is clearly not practical. Not for you, not for the schools, universities, or employers that need your diploma in order to enroll you or give you a job. The good news is that there are organizations that register diplomas centrally in a database. They are called Educational Data Depositories. They store all the educational data that has to do with you. Until recently, these data were primarily used to print out a document on paper. But this is a thing of the past. Today, information is outdated the moment it's printed. So the depositories have done away with paper and made your educational data directly available. Which is great, because now you can access them online, just like your plane tickets, bank account, and the pictures from last year's skiing trip. And so can the schools, universities, and employers that need to check your educational data. Also, since the data come directly from the schools and universities that issue them, forgeries are no longer an issue. So now for the next step. Data depositories manage educational data in a national setting. But what if you were born in Beijing, graduated in Boston, and want to apply for a job in Zurich? That would go a lot smoother if you could choose to share your educational data internationally. To make that possible, national depositories are working together in an initiative called the Groningen Declaration.
Okay, that was it. That's our commercial. And we like it, so I show it to any audience that suffers me. So, how will we achieve these goals? We have a mission. We want to deliver digital student data portability. We have a vision, trusted, digital student data ecosystem. The ecosystem word has been said several times this morning. So yes, we need an ecosystem. And we value security and privacy, right? And the Groningen Declaration Network is a public space for everyone to come and share ideas. Because by sharing ideas, we try to avoid creating silos. If something is happening in Ireland that could work with China, we try to bring the people together and talk. Not only techies, policymakers, qualification assurance, anyone that is working in this environment is welcome to join the Groningen Declaration Network and share ideas with others, so we do not reinvent wheels. So as I said, changing cultures takes some time, but it's been said several times this morning that change is accelerating. And I've been in tech for 30 years. It's really accelerating, it's crazy. In 2014, I was giving the keynote to our annual meeting in Washington, D.C. And Bitcoin was a hot word at the moment in the techie space. And we started thinking, how about EduCoin? That would be interesting if we could have an EduCoin. 3 years down the lane, we held the blockchain in education event in Groningen this September. So in 3 years, we came to a crazy idea that was said by a crazy guy in a keynote to something that brought together a lot of people to Groningen from all over the world, and it's going to be repeated next year in Berlin. That's crazy. Well, even some projects came out of that. So it's impossible. Well, it's so fast. And how did we manage to do this in just 3 years? Well, we've been having annual meetings in every part of the world so we can connect the dots and find who's working on what, where. And as you can see, we've had some of them, and we will have one more in Paris next year. And these are our catchphrases. So in Washington, we were defining the ecosystem in 2014. So we were ready to take off in Málaga. We wanted a digital world for all, making skills mobile. So you can move your skills with you and show them everywhere. And this year we've been extending engagement from Melbourne. And next year, the age of opportunity. Privacy, it was one of the last, it wasn't your question. Privacy, trust, and learner mobility. So we can move around the world, learn, and share what we are learning. By that, we've been doing pilots everywhere. There are more, just a few to show you. The USA is sort of an attractor, as we talk in physics. So everybody wants to share data with them. We have a bunch of task forces dedicated to first create our principles document. So anyone that joins the network knows what we are doing and what are they abiding to. And then we have dissemination. We are working in cross-border enrollment and student loan portability, vision for us, pilots. Privacy is one of our big task forces. We are trying to move data in a privacy-preserving way, so it does not spill around. And as you see, verification policies and best practices, that is important for credentials verifications. There's a lot of projects that are happening around us. You see the European Qualification Passport for refugees. We've been told that refugees are quite important at the moment. They can be the workforce of the future in Europe. Now that we are contracting, we need people to sustain us. If we do not start taxing the robots, that would be a good thing. Or we are working with the European student card, open badges, many things. Blockchain in education, of course. And we are fostering collaborations. And I wanted to show this one here because of just one thing. It's one of my pet peeves because of many things. It's a big success. It's my equals. They're sharing electronic credentials in a user-centric way for all New Zealand and Australian universities. It's person-centric, electronic academic credentials, verified, and the implementer is an Irish company. So it happened in Málaga. Two friends connected in my hometown, and decided to create a project that 2 years down the lane, I was in Melbourne in the launch of the service. The only thing I have to apologize to Ireland because I made an Irish family to move from Dublin to Melbourne. So you lost 4 of your people. So let's come back. Blockchain in education, just 3 years later. So the blockchain is a wave. If in these 30 years I've come to something, I have developed a nose for things that will work. And blockchain is here to stay, and it's coming in a wave form. You know that waves can be surfed on top, or you can perish under a wave. How can we do that? Because as you probably know, there are several blockchains. There's the Bitcoin one. There's people talking that a Bitcoin transaction consumes enough power to light a house for a year. That's because of the deeply technical things that happen underneath of Bitcoin transactions. But there are dissidents. There are different ways that the blockchain could be made to work, not consuming so much energy. So we have to find ways that our educational chain does not follow the energy-consuming way. We have to find different ways to do it. There are technologies emerging right now, at the moment, different chains, different ways to do it. So we have to be careful how our tech is close to our hands so we can surf the wave that is coming and will go over us, not to perish. We like to surf, we don't like to perish, right? Now, how can we surf? It's quite simple. Remember, that's our student, learner, or however we call it. I love the way you said, not women, not men, we are people. That's it. So that's why I represent it this way. So a person in the middle with all their lives. So if you remember one old commercial, it was, I think it was BMW, that said, be person-centric, my friend. Because one of the disruptions that blockchain is doing is that it's individual who is in charge of everything. One of the big mistakes we do in universities is we think that we own the data. We do not own the data. The data belongs to the person the data is about. We just curate, produce, create, control, whatever. But this is the owner. And blockchain is coming to change that paradigm. So if we don't embrace that quickly, it will simply go over us. The Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters will own the data, will control the data, and will be in control of our academic data that we produce for the people. So we should embrace quickly and be person-centric. Do not forget that. But wait, so you were talking about, at the start in the commercial, about digital data depositories. So shall we close them down? Because if we are talking that person-centric, blockchain, blah, 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 then why do we need these for? Well, it's clearly the blockchain at the moment cannot store the information, just the cryptographic things that give them truthfulness. Give them trust, give them truth, give them security, but you cannot store the diploma, the badge, or whatever in the blockchain. You need safe places to store. So the blockchain is not coming for the moment to kill the data stores. So don't be worried. There's technology, there's future for us in this space. So the GDN is open to all here. Go to our website, send us an email. Join us, do things with us. We want to connect to anyone that is doing anything in the digital credentials space, so to avoid silos popping up everywhere. I've seen very nice technologies. Even the beautiful MyEquals project is a silo, because it's in a way that, well, you can download things. The document you get is not just a document, it's also data. So you see a beautiful PDF, and underneath there are data that can be machine processed, okay? But we have to avoid the creation of silos. James Keevy was saying it. We have to interoperate. We cannot allow some commercial to come up with a beautiful idea and then try to grab all the data in their space. We have to interoperate. There's no way. China will not, for example, cooperate with LinkedIn. But we need the Chinese data to come in. And we need to send our data to China. So we cannot allow the silos to grow. Okay? Thank you. I've tried to do it in that's what Google says, that is a way to say thank you in Irish. I hope it's right. I will not try to pronounce it. And well, I know that the questions will happen later, but I want you to read the fine print here. Okay?
Thank you so much. That was excellent. Okay, before we move on, I'd just like to inform you that it's Guramahagat. That's how you say that. It's a bit of a phonetic challenge, but that's it. And thank you for your cultural reference there. Much appreciated. Our next speaker is Lee O'Farrell, who works with the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning in Higher Education. He's the National Coordinator of Ireland's Data-Enabled Student Success Initiative. Now, this initiative aims to build the capacity to gain value from data collected from IT systems in order to support effective student success strategies. Lee is on secondment to the National Forum from the UCD Registry. Lee's presentation is entitled Digital Learner Analytics, and he's going to demystify the world of data analytics in education and explore the potential of digitally enabled data analysis in order to enhance our knowledge and understanding of the student experience. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee O'Farrell.
Sorry, I feel like Jon Snow up here. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm the only person between you and your lunch. So this is something I swore I'd never do again. But I'll do my best to make the transition as painless and quick as possible. So yeah, I'd like to thank QQI for inviting me along today to talk to you about learner analytics. The demystification, I shall endeavour to do my best just as soon as I get to the bottom of it myself. So I'm just going to run through very, very high level, what do we mean when we're talking about learning analytics? How can it be used? There is an association, I think, largely with learner analytics, to those who are kind of familiar with it, that it's about retention. It's about early warning systems and retention. And while that is a feature to which it can be turned, it's far, far, far greater than that. I want to challenge just a number of the perceptions around it that may or may not be kind of represented here, but certainly the things that I've kind of heard on my travels. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Orla, who is our online resource for learning analytics. So it's a national open library of resources for institutions and teachers that wish to start using analytics. So to bring analytics down to its most basic, the application of data analytics to student learning, basically. So what it's doing is taking data, taking the minutiae of numeric or visual or qualitative data, and turning it into usable information. So data in and of itself has no meaning. It's the actions that we undertake based on it. It's the information that we received on it that has value. So this is just an example of just some of the sources of data that are currently available within, certainly within higher education institutions. The major one, obviously, the major kind of focus is on the VLE in the top left-hand corner. But this is just to give you an idea of the volume and depth of what is available. So then, what can we do with it? Well, from the arena of data analytics, there are three kind of phases in which data can be used. So it can be used to describe, so to give us an understanding of what is happening right now, which is very greatly overlooked in terms of the value of it, but is really fundamental to any institution, to any teacher. Think of a teacher standing in front of a lecture of 500 people. which is suddenly actually springing very easily to mind, with a lot of eyes looking up at you, but you have no idea where anyone in the room is. So you're 6 weeks into your introduction to microeconomics. Who in the room gets it? Who doesn't? Who is where you would expect them to be right now? Who needs help? Who's done economics before? Who isn't? Who's here because it's an elective that fits into their slot on 12 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon? So having that kind of understanding of what's happening around you is invaluable. The next one then is to predict. So the data from historic records can be used to map out what is likely, not what's going to happen, but what is likely to happen in the future. And in this, my mind is still blown away by this. It's like throwing bones up in the air and predicting the future. It actually works. You can look at numbers and predict the future. I still think that's crazy. And the final one, and this is supposed to be a lucky number 8 ball, it's the best image I could find, I'm afraid, is to actually guide actions. So the first one tells you what's happening, the second one gives you an idea of what's likely to happen, but the third one can use data to actually prescribe courses of action with a quantitative likelihood of success. So I'm just going to run through examples of each of these kind of aspects of analytics. So the first one is around describing. And what you have here is a screenshot of a thing called the Open Learning Initiative, which was developed in the US. And this is a dashboard that students see, or sorry, not students, staff, excuse me. There is also a student-facing one, which I'll come back to in a moment. So the teacher can go into this at any time, and you see the bars on the left-hand side. Each of those correspond to a learning outcome. And based in real time on quizzes that students are doing in the VLE, the lecturer knows, if I were to give the final assessment now, how many students would be expected to show that they have a good grasp of this learning outcome. As I say, this is in real time. At any time over the course of the semester, or over the course of the year, the lecturer suddenly has access to this information. So you, if you don't mind me using you as the example, are no longer a sea of faces. We're actively engaging together in the learning process, and I have an understanding of where you are and what I need to change, iteratively. And it was actually at a conversation with Niamh Lenihan that she really struck home to me the value of this in terms of quality and in terms of equality as well. Because you're no longer taking student cohort A, seeing how they did, deciding what needs to change, and then improving it for student cohort B the following year, which is great for B, but not so hot for A, because we needed the guinea pigs to find out where it was going wrong. Where now, with this sort of ability, you can tell what's happening for cohort A while it's happening and while there's still time to do something about it. So just to give you a sense that the table, I've got ahead of myself, and there's the same thing in slightly more detail. Now, as I mentioned, there's also a student-facing version of this, and studies have shown that what they did is they took a group of, I think it was statistics students, they broke them into 3 groups. They had students who studied exclusively online, they had students who studied exclusively in the classroom, and they had a hybrid approach where they used this OLI as a teaching tool in conjunction with a teacher in the room. And this is designed to give kind of on-the-spot feedback to students. It gives personalized feedback. So 3 of us might all do an online quiz. We might all get 15 out of 20, although given my academic record, that's unlikely. But different resources would benefit each of us. So based on the questions I got wrong, I may need to go to the Maths Learning Resource Centre. But based on the questions that I got wrong, maybe there's an article or 2 that I could do with looking at. But from the stuff that I got wrong, there are books in the library that would be advantageous, or further quizzes. And this system can automatically recommend resources. But they found that using this system, the students with the teacher and the students solely at home did approximately broadly the same. But the blended approach, the hybrid approach, where this was used by a tool, by a teacher, to adapt So to spend the time face-to-face, making the maximum value from that, the students in the hybrid approach showed the same understanding of the same material after half a semester that their colleagues did in a full semester. So then in terms of predicting, and this, when people talk about learning analytics, these kind of early warning systems are the primary thing that people will tend to talk about. So Lucy is a first-year student. She's just arrived. She's settling in, having a great old time coming to college. She's one of 4,000 people that have come to the institution this year. The institution has very little chance of knowing Lucy individually and knowing her needs and knowing where she is. To the extent that very often, particularly on larger programs, the first time the institution will be aware of how Lucy is doing, having started in September, is during the board process, the exam ratification process in February, which is 2 months after she's already done her exams. Now, Lucy, as it happens, has already failed 2 out of 6 modules. And now the institution knows about it, 2 months after she did the exam. Now, by using the predictive power of analytics, what you can do is you can look at the online behavior of students from previous cohorts and how they did, and look for patterns and links between the input and the output, if you like, if you don't mind me dehumanizing it in that way. And by identifying the patterns that led to this outcome, you can see the patterns in current students that are likely to lead to a similar outcome. Meaning that for Lucy, instead of February, institutions can now tell in week 4, with a very high likelihood of probability, how she's going to do. There is a PhD student in UCD who's currently looking at using VLE data, VLE quiz data, from weekly quizzes to look at predicting student grades. And by week 6, she can predict students' semester 1 grade to an average of within an average of, I think it's 2.6 percentage points. That's the average. I mean, this is incredible power and incredible potential, primarily for learners. The benefit of learning analytics is for learners. So the third aspect is this idea of prescribing, so telling, providing resources, identifying approaches. So this would often can be accommodated by recommender systems. So for example, if you went onto a certain well-known retail site and went to buy, to look at a mockingbird, or to look a mockingbird, dear God, to kill a mockingbird, it will recommend, again, the exact same approach. Other people who bought this book also bought this. And maybe there's nothing there you want. Maybe there's nothing there that applies to you. You just wanted to kill a mockingbird because you like Gregory Peck. But maybe there is something there. And this is the thing. As an individual, you still have that choice, whether you take it or not. So again, these recommender systems can also be applied to education. So this is Degree Compass, which was developed by Austin Peay University. It's a North American university. So students have a vast range of module choice. Absolutely enormous. And the challenge then can be finding modules that are suitable or appropriate to them or to their course. So what this system does is it looks at various aspects of your student record, looks at modules, previous students with similar aspects to their records, the modules they've picked and how it worked out for them. It takes into account, other modules you've done, the curriculum you're currently taking, how you've done in them. And really incredibly, what it can do is provide a predicted grade of how you may do in this module, how you may expect to do in this module, right? Now remember that it makes the prediction before you have sat in a lecture theatre. It makes the prediction before you have done an assessment. It makes the prediction before you've registered to the module. And in cases where it predicted students were likely to get a grade of A or B, it was correct in 95% of cases. And I emphasize again, that's before students had even registered to the module. So then we just want to look at a couple of maybe the more negative perceptions, or in some cases excessively positive perceptions about learning analytics. So the first one is This very powerful phrase, education by surveillance. You can't talk about learning analytics with someone talking about Big Brother. As it happens, last year I was presenting at an event in Milton Keynes, a learning analytics event, and the hotel obviously knew that I was coming because they put me in room 101, which I always find tremendously entertaining. But anyway, like the recommender systems I mentioned earlier, what analytics does is it answers a question. That's its function, that's its role. Whether students take that option, whether they utilize it, their freedoms are not in any way impeded. It's essential, though, that analytics must be done legally. Data protection is arguably the major concern, particularly with the GDPR coming next year. It must be done ethically. We have to remember what we're doing in education. Our role is not just to churn out students who are getting A's. This is why with the new project, the Data-Enabled Student Success, we're focusing on student success, not on learning analytics. Learning analytics is just a tool to enable that. And finally, it's absolutely essential to have a collaborative approach where all stakeholders, particularly students, are represented. If you want to have an approach that means you have nothing to hide from students, then tell them everything. And by telling them everything, you show both to them and to yourselves that this is an open process intended for the benefit of students. There have also been accusations against it of spoon-feeding students. You're making it far too easy. It was different in my day. You know, we used to have to walk 15 miles in bare feet and find the lecturer wouldn't talk to you. You know, the library was closed all day, every day. We had to teach ourselves Latin. And there is, you know, there's some truth to that. You know, I mean, a lot of the role in what we're trying to do is develop independent thinkers, is develop critical thinkers, is to develop self-motivated learners. But these are all things that we express as graduate outcomes that we desire. So they're things that we expect our graduates to have once they've been here for 3 or 4 years. You can't reasonably expect them to have the attribute when they walk in the door 3 months after they were in an institution where they had to ask permission to go to the bathroom. And these are the students who will benefit. This is an opportunity to teach them the basic skills of being a critical thinker, of being an independent learner. The next one is we don't have the resources. Learning analytics, no, it's too complex. I'm not a statistician, I'm not a mathematician. No, I don't understand it, it's too complex. We need, the other association with learning analytics is we need to go and spend €250,000 on a platform. We need to go and buy the bells and whistles, brand new thing. This is a dashboard, arguably stolen, certainly marginally plagiarized from the OLI that I showed you earlier. So what it's doing is it's showing for each of the outcomes, so each column represents an outcome, and how students broadly are doing. Now, I developed this in Excel in about 40 minutes. I'm not by any means an IT expert. Just ask my wife or children. I'm certainly not. I'm not a statistician. I'm not a mathematician. It doesn't have to be complicated. There is far, far, far more value in getting started, doing what you can now with what you have now, than waiting until you have 250 grand knocking about to pay for a platform and not knowing how you're going to use it anyway. I mean, we're all going to make mistakes with these things as we're getting started, so make mistakes while they're cheap, and then know what you want to do once you get further along. So this is my final slide, and this is the one where I'm challenging the positive perception of learning analytics. Is having said all of that, there are remarkable, incredible things that it can do. That's absolutely true. Sorry, no, that's not true at all. That's completely untrue. There are remarkable, incredible things that it can support, that it can help you to do. In and of itself, it does nothing. Learning analytics answers a question. It doesn't change anything. Learning analytics has never retained a single student. It has never enhanced the educational experience of a single person. It's what has been done with the answer to the question that was raised that makes the difference. It's what you do that makes the change. So learning analytics provides the answer, but then the important thing is taking effective, well-informed, evidence-based action based on it. So learning analytics is not a magic wand. It's not a cure-all. It's a tool. I should have practiced my timing better on that. Hang on. Learning analytics is not a magic wand. It's a tool. Okay. Right, I'm done. And like any other tool, it does what you make it do. You know, a person decides they want to build a table. So they go on the website says, well, you need this amount of timber, and you need a saw, and you need a drill. So they go out and buy all the timber, they buy the saw, they buy the drill, stick them all in the garage, and go in and make a cup of tea. And then 2 days later, they go back out to check their table, and lo and behold, you wouldn't believe it, the timber is still sitting in a pile there, the saw still has its sheath on, and the drill remains unplugged. Maybe it needs more time. So they go off, they come back 2 days later, everything is exactly the same. A tool doesn't do anything. It enables you to do something. But conversely, if you ever try to make a table without a saw, you realize the value of having the right tool. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. I was marginally premature. I do apologize. So this, just to briefly run through Orla, our online resource for learning analytics, realizing the value of using analytics well. We set about to build this online library. It was compiled with the support of 60 people from across the sector, some of whom I see here today, looking at areas like ethics, policy, law, IT, data, and effective interventions, actually making use of what you have. And that will be launched very, very shortly. And I thank you again.
Would you like to sit up here, because I think... Thank you very much indeed, and I'm sure that now we're going to have try and pull everything together. Our speakers, Victoriano and Lee, are coming back to the stage, and I just want to check, James Keevy, are you still there? No, gone. Okay. Well, there you go. It would have been nice to have him, but maybe a bridge too far. Well, we've now heard the 3 cutting-edge presentations on developments in the digital student data ecosystem. And shortly, I hope we might have time for a question or two from the floor. But first, to help us deconstruct those presentations, if you like, or to bring a bit of analysis to them, we're going to have a reaction from Dr. Bryan Maguire, who's the Director of Quality Assurance at Quality and Qualifications Ireland, our host today. His academic background was in the field of psychology. He's previously served as Director of Academic Affairs at the Higher Education and Training Awards Council, a predecessor of QQI, and he was also head of the School of Creative Technologies at IADT. He's also a member of the Hong Kong Council for Accreditation of Academic and Vocational Qualifications. Bryan, if you could come up. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ingrid. I can speak from here. Yeah, I'm Mike. And thank you to our 3 speakers. You've really given us some striking disruptions. And that in a way was what the purpose of having today's event was, when QQI was trying to think how we were going to introduce the topic of changes in the world of quality and qualifications. And the first disruption is, if you look in your pack and you see the attendance list, or you turn to the person next to you and look at the attendance list, you see that people are coming together because this topic, this disruption in the education and training systems and its place in the wider skills system is already pointing to barriers being broken between schools and post-schools, between further education and higher education, between training and skills, between formal and informal learning, and as Victoriano has pointed out in one of his slides. And in order for that disruption to be turned into something promising, the people who are being disrupted need to get together and share their ideas. So that's the first sign of the disruption. But looking through the thread of the presentations here today, Victoriano, you talked about making the credential recognition system more person-centric. And I'm linking that back to a point that was made in different ways several times in the first session, which was that our competitive advantage lies in being human. So if our competitive advantage in this technology-disrupted world where robots are taking our jobs, et cetera, lies in being human, then the credential system has to capture those aspects of being human, has to capture a wider dimension of being human in order to bring about, to represent it, again to use James's word, to represent those wider dimensions of being human that make what we can do better than what an artificial intelligence system can do, or so on. So we identify all the time some of those things that are uniquely human. So for example, doing what I'm doing now, synthesizing across half a dozen speakers in a context of knowing who's in the room, conscious that we are 5 minutes from lunch. No, robot doesn't need lunch, but I know that you all need lunch. Bringing all that to bear and then trying to find ways of expressing that draw on my own background. That's all part of the unique human contribution. How would I represent that skill? Maybe I do a video. Thank you down at the back. So that I can put a clip on my LinkedIn or something like that. So these are ways of representing that unique human contribution that we can all do. And then where do we take that forward into the piece on learning analytics? Because it also starts, the question that was provoked in my mind by what Lee was presenting was, well, if you can, the system, the learner analytics system can predict what a student's grade is going to be, then is what we've asked that student to do really very human? Is it really developing those unique human characteristics in their educational experience? Or is it in fact simply replicating some aspects of an entirely predictable logical system that could equally well be performed by a neural network that would sit in the back of the lecture room and absorb the slides as well? If that's the case, then that suggests not simply that the marking system or the student support system is going to be disrupted by learner analytics, but it puts a real mirror back to, are the learning outcomes what we really thought the learning outcomes are to be? Or do we want to cast our learning outcomes in ways that capture the unique expansion of the human capacities that our learners are undergoing when they're in the education and training systems, when they're in our colleges? Or, of course, not all the learning is happening in the colleges. A lot of the learning is happening in our workplaces, in their part-time jobs, in their online browsing behavior, in Facebook, where they're getting all their news and so on. And we as credentialers don't own those systems. But what parts of them are desirable to credential? Is the world of what gets credentialed opened up? And finally, I suppose to respond to some of James's questioning over the role of official credentialers or credential evaluators, qualifications authorities like QQI. Does our role, if blockchain has made our technological or our formal contribution somewhat redundant, at least in some future, what other roles do we have in terms of fostering the trust that's necessary, the levels of acceptability? Because again, back to the human facets that are not going to be addressed by the technology, is the system, the ecosystem in which these are going to be revealed. Yes, it's true, we don't want to be carting around mountains of paper, but the paper also serves not just an informational function in terms of the underlying data, but it also serves a symbolic function. I can put it on the wall. When I go to get my credential, I don't just, at least typically in the Irish university, Irish higher education or further education system, you don't just get a credential. You have a formal ceremony. Maybe you dress up. Maybe people make speeches. There's ritual aspects. There are symbolic aspects. And as we look to the disruption, we also have to think, well, how are those symbolic systems going to be disrupted? And do we need and is the potential disruption of those sufficient that it'll undermine the acceptance or the uptake of the kind of technological solutions that are being offered by you and your colleagues. So with that, I think it may be time to take a few questions from the audience. I don't know.
Excellent, thank you so much. Now, this is the moment. You have a chance to ask questions of our panel. We have a roving mic, so if anybody would like to put their hands up. Oh, come on. Seriously? Oh, sorry, there's a gentleman here. Yeah, this
Hi,
gentleman.
and thanks for very interesting presentations. Just on the learning analytics.
Would you mind just identifying yourself? It just
Sorry.
helps people to know where you're coming from.
Ross Anderson, University of Limerick. On the learning analytics example from the States that predicted your grade, the optics around about predicting a student to get an A is actually quite challenging for us. And I suppose you could almost frame that in the part that the prediction is that there will be no new learning in the next module. If we know you're going to get an A in the next module, then actually you might be beneficial to take a module that we can predict you might not do as well in, because the learning objectives from that module might actually be more of a challenge. Now, from an optics from students, I probably know which one they're going to select. And I think that's a challenge going forward when we almost dispose of the new learning opportunities for them, and it's not necessarily just linked to the final degree classification. I'd just like any comments on that, if there are any.
Maybe Lee would start on that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Excuse me, yeah, I think that's extremely valid and a really important consideration. I think a lot of what we've spoken about today is the difference between the mechanical and the personal. Excuse me. And I think it's very important in using this data that we don't become absorbed in this concept of people as inevitable automatons. With regards to the students who tend to do well, the other thing that you'll find with analytics is it actually contains very few surprises. Often it just gives evidence for what you already knew was there. So generally you'll find that the students who are showing evidence of being most engaged, the students with the highest attendance, the students who appear to be working the hardest, are the ones who tend to do the best. So it's not just that they're fated by what they've accomplished before to get this inevitable grade that if they didn't bother doing the course on quantum mechanics, they'd still have the same understanding. It's that they have these similar traits to the kind of students who've done well in the module before. But I think that aspect of challenging students is very important that doesn't get lost.
Maybe Victoriano, you would be able to bring something to that in terms of your international experience.
Well, not exactly in my international experience. I've been thinking a lot while you were presenting, Lee, that first thing is that how predictable humans are, and the other thing is, are we sort of ignoring the black swan? And going from that, in front of you, you have one black swan. I suffered the predecessor of analytics when I was ending high school. They said that I should take telecommunications engineering. I couldn't do that because of economical problems in the family, so I ended up doing medicine. But before finishing my career, I was already fiddling with computers. And just after I finished, I took a job as a systems management engineer with an MD. And now here I am, talking to you as a CIO from a 40,000 strong community. So clearly the analytics were right, because I ended up working as an engineer. But in the meantime, I became a better engineer because I look at the systems in a systematic view that I have very brilliant engineers working for me, but they do not take that step back to look at the whole picture. They hide their heads in the problems. So it's interesting. So, you know, learning analytics, yes, but we should sort of challenge the student to take the difficult courses, as you were saying. Go to medicine instead of telecommunications. You know, that's the idea. So that was what I was thinking.
Bryan?
It's a long-standing truism in the discussion about qualifications and credentials that credentials aren't just about signaling knowledge or learning. They're also about positioning. They're also about competition. And this is something which we run the risk if we focus just on the technical affordances that we've and the if you like, the ostensible or superficial purposes of a credential that, oh, it's to show you've learned something. No, it's not to show that I've learned something. It's to show that I've learned more than Lee or than Victoriano, so that I get the job offer before they do, because I've got a higher grade. And that means it's not actually learning. It's very much a second or third order function of learning. And this, again, is a challenge to the reductionism of credentials. I mean, we're very familiar with this, of course, and Mary, I'm sure, has been struggling in the backwash from the qualifications that are required to get in, and the impact that has on the leaving cert, the kind of learning that people do in senior cycle and so on. We're all familiar with that points race. And this similar kind of phenomenon can happen, and I think that's what you're pointing to down there about the perverse effects, if you like, of something like learning analytics. So in any new technology, there are always going to be unintended consequences, and there's potential unintended consequences in that widespread deployment of learner analytics, as there are in other technologies, like blockchain, for example.
Okay, can we take another question? I think there was a gentleman over this gentleman here in the shirt. And again, if you could identify yourself, please, that would be helpful.
Larry McGuire, the Institute of Technology at Blanchardstown. First of all, thank you very much for a very thought-provoking morning. All disruptive technologies have a dark side, and I'm very conscious. For example, the Airbnb.
We're not getting your mic.
You're getting a new one.
Well, all technologies, all disruptive technologies have a dark side, if they work.
You were hacked by the Russian mafia, maybe.
Yeah. So Larry McNutt, Institute of Technology, Blanchardstown. Once again, thank you for all the thought-provoking inputs. I was conscious when I heard the Airbnb example, and I'm also very conscious that it brought protesters out on the streets of Barcelona, because Airbnb didn't do what it set out to do, which was to unleash an income generation opportunity for someone that had a spare bedroom. In fact, it turned out to disrupt the market in a very negative way. So I think my question really to the panel is, how do we ensure as educators that those disruptive technologies that we've heard about don't simply continue to advantage those that are already advantaged, and that we use them to really address the serious issues that we have in primary, secondary, further and higher education, which is that we have quite a significant embedded inequality now. And how can we ensure, as an Irish nation, we use these wonderful technologies to address that, not just national issue, but I would say also a global issue. And maybe that could be the hallmark of the Irish contribution to the digitalisation or the changing role of qualifications and credentials. Thank you.
Maybe this time I'll start with Bryan. Bryan, that inequality issue.
I was afraid you'd do that.
Yeah,
yes.
But it is the thing that people fear most. I mean, even the predictive scope of Lee's contribution there, it's more or less saying, like, surely early on it's picking up that some people have had a better education, some people have had parents making sure they do their homework, some people have whatever. And if the data is saying, okay, we're definitely, that person's going to get an A, like, the system will bring them forward in a way. And how do, just wondering about that equality issue.
That's great. And inequality or equality challenge remains fundamentally a political question rather than a technological question. And I think what Larry is talking about is making sure that we look around the edges of the technology to ensure that it doesn't exacerbate existing inequalities and where it's possible to remedies it. And again, it strikes me that one potential for that is in broadening the range of what counts as credentialable or potential to be credentialed. There's a great scene in The Wire, and I think it's the second series of The Wire, where there's school teachers trying to get along the kids from the hood, from the street corners who are drug dealers. And the way he encourages them to pick up their maths is by, rather than framing it in apples and oranges or indeed in abstract terms, but he exploits the learning that they've already acquired about how to do deals, how to cut drugs, and and exchange that for cash. I'm not suggesting a micro-credential in that area, but who knows?
It'll definitely be a disruptive technology.
It's definitely a disruptive technology. It's a transferable skill. The point, but taking that question more generally, it comes back in some ways to the irreducibility of those education professionals in that first thing, to identify what people have already learned, what people have from their environment, from their informal learning that can be actually adapted and brought to bear, maybe credentialed or maybe just informally used as scaffold learning that leads to formal credentialing within the school system, within the education system.
Lee, your comments on that inequality issue?
Well, I think the first thing, if the Irish contribution could be to use these technologies to enhance equality, I think that is an extremely noble and worthwhile goal, and I think that's exactly what we should be aiming for. I also think that the system that you're talking about, where the ones who do well do better, and the ones who don't, has built up over decades and centuries. And only a disruptive technology can disrupt that cycle. I'm thinking of learning analytics. I mean, the primary interest in analytics is around identifying at-risk students way beforehand. And going back to your initial point, hopefully, not because Victoriano is likely to get an A anyway, so he's the kind of student that we want, but because we know that Bryan is less likely to, but now we know in week 4, instead of when it's already too late, so that institutions can start providing resources and supports and the kind of substitutes for the kind of background that you're talking about much, much, much earlier. How it's used, again, like any tool, going back to the example of the saw, you can use a saw to rob a bank. You can use a saw to mug somebody. Any tool has the potential to be misused and abused. And hence, really why in working with the Irish sector around this area, we're really pushing that idea of it's how you use it and what it is that you're trying to do with it. And having very much that goal of supporting the students who need it most when they need it most, ideally.
Victoriano, if I can come to you, I mean, like, what sort of experience have you encountered on those issues of inequality, and where is the scope for improving or narrowing the gap?
I was thinking that first, this morning someone projected an image of a Pakistani girl sitting beside and she learning physics. And it was here in Dublin that I learned about another Indian project that was called A Hole in the Wall. That was a hole that they put a computer so street kids could go there. So probably if we combine all the technologies we have around in a way that we can provide education, easy access to education to anyone, like it's been seen that it works, then we analyze those ones so we can bring them forward, grab them from the streets as soon as we can, and provide them with more tools to develop, and then provide them with the ways to prove that they have learned what they have learned in a way that cannot be taken from them, which is the most important thing, because we have big numbers of refugees coming to us that really highly educated and they cannot prove it. And that's a big problem. And we have a technology that will allow them to show that, because on the blockchain you can store anything, and if a state crumbles, there's no problem, because the data will be floating there somewhere. So I think that we have enough disruptive technologies to bring education forward if we manage to use them properly, instead of just grabbing the A so we have a wonderful university that only produces very intelligent and very nice students out of our degree mill machine, not a different approach to the degree mills, diploma mills, but we are sort of diploma mills, doing what industry wants us. Someone said in 5 years, they will not want what they are asking for now. So we should sort of change our way of thinking. Industry, go and educate your workforce, because we will produce critical thinkers, basic science, and those things.
Well, I think that if anyone was thinking of leaving early this afternoon, the quality of the exchanges we've just had when we've opened things up to the floor will advise you to stay, because we do have a we've a period set aside this afternoon for more interaction, and I think that that's likely to generate more interesting thought as well. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this morning's proceedings. Before we go to lunch, I'd like to thank the panel for this module, Victoriano Geralt, Leo Farrell and Bryan Mcguire, and James Keevy for spending his time with us earlier on Skype.